welcome everyone to this session on selective mutism. I'm really pleased to be able to bring you two exciting sessions from Gino Hippolito, which will be featuring up-to-date research he's been conducting in this area. So really excited about that. And we're going to have time at the end of this session to take questions live in the room. So please do use the questions tab, post your questions as you go. And Gino will answer those he can manage in the time that's available. Any that he doesn't have time to answer, we will have the questions available afterwards and can go back and answer those. Again, remember that your feedback is really important. So do share feedback to help organisers and presenters at the end. And as ever, there will be the inimicable secret code shown on the screen, and you can use that to basically get your points and head over to the Challenge Hub and move your way up the leaderboard. So I'm going to hand over to Gino now, who's going to take you through his two presentations.
Thanks, Anita. Sorry. Okay, I'll try again. I don't have the access to share. Sorry, everyone, for the technical difficulties. That's all good. Okay, great. Sorry, everyone, for the technical difficulties. Thank you, Anita, for the introduction. My name is Gino Hippolito, and today I'll be presenting two talks on my research in selective mutism. The first talk is based on my qualitative research, which is learning from lived experiences of childhood selective mutism and intervention to inform more empathic, empowering practices. It's a section of a larger qualitative part of my DPhil at the University of Oxford, and this research is funded by the National Institute of Health and Care Research as part of my clinical doctoral research fellowship. And I'd like to just thank Professor Michael Larkin, Professor Kate Nation, and Professor Kathy Creswell for supervising me during this study. So selective mutism, also referred to as SM in the presentation, is an anxiety disorder described as the consistent failure to speak in specific social situations where there's an expectation to speak, such as at school, despite being able to speak in other situations like at home. In children, this failure to speak interferes with their education and social communication, and without proper, appropriate support, it can continue into adulthood and affect employment, relationships, mental health, and well-being. My colleagues and I published a systematic review and meta-analysis examining 25 non-pharmacological intervention studies and found that the most common treatment approach was used a combined systems and behavioral intervention. So the systems intervention targeted the knowledge and the skills and interactions of significant people around the child with SM, and the behavioral part of the intervention targeted the behavioral factors thought to maintain the mutism, such as avoidance, while implementing exposure activities. In the meta-analysis of 3 randomized controlled trials, the treatment, combined systems and behavioral approach compared to waiting list controls were found to be effective with a large effect size and a significant effect size in improving speaking behavior and promising effects in improving remission rates. But due to the small number of studies in the meta-analysis, we need to be cautious. While the systematic review identified what intervention approaches are used in effective interventions for selective mutism, it did not explain how these approaches are used to make them effective for these children. People's experiences can shape how interventions are developed. In the UK, experience-based designs, and more recently known as experience-based co-design, aims to understand service users' experiences to develop and improve healthcare services and intervention. However, there's a gap in the research about understanding people's experiences in childhood selective mutism. There's limited qualitative research in selective mutism, with few studies exploring parent and teachers' perspectives in peer-reviewed and also grey literature, and a few qualitative studies exploring the experiences and views of children and adults with lived experience of SM. So the aim of the study was to explore the experiences and views of childhood selective mutism and intervention, and what are meaningful outcomes from the perspective of children with SM and adults with lived experience of SM, reflecting back, and the parents also. The children with SM experienced therapy between the ages of 3 and 12, and the children that I was interviewing were between the ages of 7 and 14. We explored what it was like to have SM, what was helpful during the intervention and support, and what was unhelpful during the intervention and support, and what they would like to be done differently. The data from today's talk is part of a larger qualitative study that also explored teaching staff's and therapists' perspective, which perhaps some of the therapists here in this room also contributed to that, so I thank you for that. The nature of SM makes it a challenge to do qualitative research in this population. Based on clinical experience and clinical experience working with selective mutism, together with ideas and feedback from the study expert reference group, consisting of 6 parents of children with SM, 2 of whom are clinicians, and 2 other well-experienced clinicians as well, and an adult with SM in that expert reference group, and ideas based on Walker to Bell's qualitative research on adults with lived experience. We created flexible modes of interviewing for those with SM to participate in research. To improve inclusivity, we offered online, in-person, live, asynchronous interviews, and allowed for verbal, text, visuals, gestures for communication. After we received ethical approval from the University of Oxford Ethics Committee, we pre-registered the study protocol on the Open Science Framework website, and we posted the study flyers on various forms of social media, SM networks, and professional networks. We had flexible options for the children with selective mutism. They could choose a parent-led interview or a researcher-led interview. The researcher-led interview could be online or in person at the University of Oxford. We had information sheets to explain what happens in an online interview, how to set up the environment to reduce the child's anxiety for each of the interview types. And for in-person interviews, we also had a video explaining what to expect when entering the university, the building, the waiting area, and what the potential interview rooms looked like. We also used a comfort scale to monitor the child's anxiety during the interview, which is going to be on the next slide. But with each of the interviews, there were 2 parts. The first part, we asked low communication risk type questions, scaling up in small steps to high communication risk. So for example, we used easy factual one-word answers, such as, what is large, has a trunk, tusks, and floppy ears? Then we moved on to factual phrase sentence level answers. So when it's cold, what do you do to stay warm? Then we moved on to then personal one-word answers, then personal sentence level answers, then on to the child's special interests. The second part of the interview then covers the experience at school. So starting with the concrete, describe your school for me, or what does your classroom look like? Then we moved on to their experience. So remember when you find it difficult to talk at school, who were the people trying to help you with your talking? And then we explored, what did you do with them? What helped and what didn't help? We explained what the comfort scale was and how to use it, and asked parents to customize it to their child's needs with their child. We also used the comfort scale for adults with lived experience of selective mutism, and they could have a trusted friend or family member present for support during the interview. And they could customize the actions in the right column that corresponds with the comfort or stress number. So throughout the interview, the parent checked in with the child, or the researcher, myself, checked in with the child or adult. So using the comfort scale from 0 to 4, what number would you rate yourself at the moment? And if they indicated a 0 or a 1, we would continue the interview. If they indicated a 2, we'd have a break. And if they indicated a 3 and a 4, we would stop the interview. We had flexible options for the adult with SM. They could choose from live interviews, so online or in person, or delayed asynchronous interviews, self-recorded or typed. If it was a live interview, it could be verbal, typed, or a combination of the two. And if it was a delayed interview, they could choose to video record or just audio record themselves answering the questions, or they could send a typed response to the questions in a Word document. I sent the interview schedule before the interview so that they can prepare and be aware of the questions asked. For the qualitative analysis, we used interpretative phenomenological analysis, also known as IPA, and it's an inductive method starting with the specific observations, working to develop broader themes from the data. We chose this approach because, as Smith and colleagues put it, IPA is a qualitative research approach committed to the examination of how people make sense of their major life experiences. Due to IPA's commitment to ideography, which is the commitment to the particular, it focuses on depth rather than breadth of understanding of a phenomenon. So the sample sizes tend to be small, usually 3 to 6 for doctoral level research, studying one homogeneous group linked to a phenomenon. However, our focus was multi-perspectival. We wanted to explore children and adults' lived experience with SM and parents, and with each of the groups aiming for maybe 4 to 5 participants. In this portion of the study, we had 13 interviews, 4 children with lived experience of SM, 3 adults with lived experience of SM, and 6 parents of children with SM. In the broader study, we had 5 therapists and 3 school staff. Looking at the sample, there was limited ethnic and gender diversity, which is a limitation to the study, although there was some linguistic diversity among the children, adults, and parents, with just over half were bilingual. And in this portion of the study, there was over 17 hours of interviews and 192 pages of transcripts. And there were 5 overarching study experiential themes and 12 sub-themes, which I'll go through now. The names of the participants have been changed to preserve their anonymity. Theme 1, alienated and misunderstood by having SM. Isolation and vulnerability. There were consistent quotes among the children and adults of not feeling normal, being different from everyone else. The experience of childhood selective mutism made the child feel alienated, isolated, and vulnerable. Brenner, an adult with lived experience of SM, shared, as a child, it really makes you feel alone when you're in the position where you can't ask for help. Brenner also shared how someone dropped a bowling ball on her foot at a party and broke a big toe, and no one knew until her mum collected her and she told her what had happened. Meda, an adult with lived experience, described having a big fear of not ever being able to speak, not being able to get through day-to-day life and through school. Misunderstood. Children with SM shared how people thought that they were rude for not saying hello or goodbye. Another child, Isabella, shared how her teacher took it personally when she didn't speak to her. The teacher said to her, "Why can't you say yes? I see you talking to your friends, but you're not talking to me now." Claire, an adult with lived experience, said, "Because I didn't really talk much, people didn't think I was intelligent. My mum and dad did, but like teachers and other people at school didn't think I was that smart." Naomi, a parent, described SM as a mask that shows a different child. And she said, "But a lot of people saw this meek, shy child, but actually she's completely opposite. She's very bold, she's boisterous, she's very loud. She's the loudest one in the house. She loves dancing, she loves music, she loves singing, she loves craft and creating characters and things like that. And she's got a wicked sense of humor that would never come across without the SM mask being taken away." Very different presentation that other people saw of her. Theme 2, powerlessness and emotional and financial costs. Powerless when I'm frozen. Children and adults with SM made it clear that it isn't a choice. They could not control the selective mutism, describing that when they wanted to speak, they froze and physically couldn't. Naomi, a parent, recollects about her daughter. She had a very profound selective mutism that made her completely frozen, so she couldn't interact with anybody and would just sit and stand and not just not talk, but would not be able to pick up things and play with other children. Hinders access and participation to everyday activities. Children reported that they couldn't ask for help. They'd get stuck and not finish their work. Meda, an adult with SM, shared that she had lots of questions she couldn't ask and therefore missed learning opportunities. She also missed opportunities to answer questions in class and show the teacher her knowledge. The emotional and financial costs. The journey for parents can be emotionally draining experience with feelings of deep sadness, self-blame, guilt, feeling heartbroken seeing their child miss out, feeling overwhelmed, desperate, isolated, and worrying about the future. One parent suffered from insomnia for several months and felt exhausted trying to support their child, trying to find the right support from the health service or independent therapists. Parents often felt powerless and voiceless in the experience of trying to support their child, trying to effect change, but not being heard by health professionals and school staff. As speech language therapists, we need to consider how to empower them and advocate for them to be heard and involved. Parents also shared how it was financially costly for their family. Since there were few national health services providing intervention and support for children with SM in the UK, parents have to seek private therapy. And one parent mentioned that they spent up to £30,000. One was desperate for their child to receive some sort of support, so they paid for her to go to a summer camp in the US for children with SM. Another parent gave up her job to support her child to learn how to apply the therapy and provide homeschooling for her child. Theme 3, a safe SM-informed environment and a manageable small steps program. Feeling safe in the environment. In these environments, the child feels safe because they know that the people understand what they're going through and are looking out for their needs. This involves training those around the child about selective mutism and how to help. Children feel safe in the environment when the people around them take away the pressure to speak while finding flexible ways to communicate and participate. For some examples, the children shared, they use sign language, gestures, some use visuals. So an example is they had a counter of 2 colors, and one indicated that the child understood, and the other side indicated the child needs help. And also others reported writing things down. Feeling safe with people. Safe people focus on building the trusting relationship with the child. Safe people are easy to talk to, patient and kind. Safe people are non-judgmental and are not dismissive. Safe people see the child as an individual and someone they and not someone they had to fix. And the children and adults could sense someone who was trying to fix them. That came through in several comments. Safe people don't pressure the child to speak. And safe people are tuned into the child's needs, being compassionate, showing empathy, and showing acceptance. Feeling safe to take small steps out of their comfort zone. When the child is feeling safe enough, they're unlikely to freeze and be overly anxious. It enables them to engage and take small steps to communicate and participate outside of their comfort zone. Chelsea, the child with SM, recalls her first sliding in session. Nerve-wracking the first few times, but then I got used to it and it ended up being easier. Other children and adults with SM shared instances when steps in the program by the therapist or school staff were too big and unattainable, issuing the need to be careful to make the steps manageable for the child. Theme 4, pressure to speak in situations that increase anxiety, and an environment or situations that perpetuate the mutism. Pressure to speak. Meda, an adult with SM, reflects, I remember a few instances in primary school. I was picked on by teachers to answer questions and really forced to answer. And of course, I didn't verbally answer and was made to feel guilty, punished for not speaking, made to feel I wasn't capable enough in my knowledge. Brenna, an adult with SM, recalls, as a child, I was really aware that adults were trying really hard to be that one that I would speak to, that always made things worse. Environmental dissonance. Environments that felt unsafe or too safe environments can hinder progress or set the child back. The environment that felt unsafe for the child with SM is when teachers and students made unhelpful comments about the child not speaking or putting pressure on the child to speak. Unsafe environments is when teachers were overly strict or would shout or have an angry tone, and it would put the child on edge or make them hypervigilant. Unsafe environments are also situations where the child is put on the spot to do something or say something, or if they felt judged. Situations that also make the child feel overwhelmed, either too many people in the room or the activity. There's a dissonance in the lack of harmony to the child's needs in these environments. The environment that's too safe for the child with SM is when it facilitates avoidance. For example, not giving the child opportunities to communicate and speak, and people speaking for the child reinforces the avoidance. Julia, a parent, describes how the school moved from one extreme to another, from putting pressure on her daughter to speak to then backing off to the point where they didn't speak to her. And then, as Julia put it, she became invisible and felt very vulnerable. Theme 5, improving agency and access to life like other children, developing agency and independence. Chelsea shared shared, it's completely changed my life for the better, because now I actually go to the shops by myself if I wanted to. I can communicate with people. I don't just freeze up if someone asks me for directions or something. I can naturally give them an answer. It just feels amazing, and I'm able to communicate with people, and I just love it. Naomi, a parent, shares, so by the end of primary school, she was completely independent, able to talk to everybody, and very relaxed in the environment and just confident. It allowed her to, as she would say, show her true self, to dance, to sing, to be in the choir and be silly and daft and mischievous and all those things that she is, that she could lose that mask because she felt so relaxed there. Feeling normal and having access to life. A consistent theme from children with SM and adults with lived experience of SM was that they just wanted to feel normal, being treated like other children and having the opportunities like the other children, being able to access and participate in things and develop friendships like everyone else, like answering questions and sharing their ideas in class, making friends and staying friends, to be able to play and join activities, to have fun with others and laugh with friends, to thrive as a person and access the world around them, engaging in hobbies, sports, and clubs, just like the other kids. So the first two studies echoed the same feeling, the sense of feeling alienated, not normal, and misunderstood. The sense of powerlessness that hinders access and participation, having a knock-on effect on the child's and family's emotional well-being and financial costs. So there's no surprise that these two themes have a direct correlation with a meaningful outcome in theme 5, shown by the dotted line. Outcomes that are empowering to improve the child's agency and independence, outcomes that resonate with the child's desire to feel normal, having access to life activities just like the other children. What type of outcomes are we using as therapists when we provide interventions? Are they all about just speaking? The pressure to speak and the situations that increase anxiety, so the situations dissonant to the child's needs in theme 4 perpetuate selective mutism and hinders progress. The lens of lived experience informs a more empathic and empowering practice in theme 3 to create a safe SM-informed environment and a manageable small steps program. So a support and intervention that makes the child feel safe in their environment, feel safe with the people that they're working with, and during the program feel safe enough to take those small steps out of their comfort zone. This is the first study using multi-perspectival IPA in the context of childhood selective mutism intervention. It's important for individuals' voices to be heard to inform how they receive care. By using flexible approaches to communicate in communication and interviewing, children and adults with lived experience of SM were able to share their experiences and be heard. It was important also to hear the experiences of parents to further contextualize the childhood selective mutism intervention. While the systematic review shows what intervention approaches are effective, the qualitative study shows how an effective intervention is to be experienced by individuals with SM and parents. In conclusion, reflecting on these lived experiences can steer further towards empathic and empowering practices for the children with SM and their families. It helps us focus on the child's perspective of what is a safe environment or safe enough for them to access activities, what is safe enough for them to take small steps out of their comfort zone to develop their agency. In addition, the new flexible methodology applied in the study enables people with SM to have a voice and be involved in research to improve understanding of the condition, in interventions and outcomes for the future. So my second talk is based on my survey study, a survey of pediatric professionals providing psychological or speech and language therapy to understand selective mutism training needs and therapy provision. The study is also part of my DPhil in the University of Oxford, and the research was also funded by the National Institute of Health and Care Research. And I'd like to thank Professor Vicky Joffe and Professor Kate Nation, Professor Kathy Cresswell for supervising me during this study. So just referring back to the recent systematic review, in the review, we found that the common SM intervention components in the literature were exposure, reward, psychoeducation, and rapport building. Those 4 particular components were found in over 68% of the studies in the systematic review. And then transfer of control and coping strategies were found in 40% of the studies. So the exposure component involves exposing the child to the fear or the avoided behavior. In SM, that is speaking. So most often using techniques of exposure were stimulus fading, also known as sliding in, shaping, graded exposure in video self-modeling, which tends to happen more in the US than here in the UK. Reward is, or contingency management, is positive reinforcement for appropriate behavior in the form of praise or tangible reinforcers, such as a reward chart, or activity reinforcers, such as screen time, perhaps. Psychoeducation is educating the child and those around the child about SM, and rapport building is using specific SM-friendly strategies to connect with a child. And other examples, defocused communication, similar to parent-child interaction strategies, but without being face-to-face. Transfer of control is in the context of SM, is transferring the knowledge, skills, and strategies to control the selective mutism from the therapist to the parent, and then from the parent to the child, so that ultimately the child is in control of their SM. It's what we naturally do as therapists in empowering children and families to who we work with, but we also may not use the term, but we will become familiar with it once we understand it. Coping strategies may be grounding techniques or breathing techniques, self-regulating techniques that have been described in the literature to help reduce anxiety in the moment. There are very few surveys exploring professionals' training and experience in selective mutism. The two surveys found were grey literature, so they were published dissertations. Ellis in 2015 surveyed 166 school psychologists, so educational psychologists, we call them in this country, in the US, and they found that 71.5% did not receive any training in SM in their pre-registration program, and 90% felt inadequately prepared to help SM students in their schools after graduating. Williams in 2019 surveyed 102 school-based speech and language pathologists and 79 school psychologists in the US about their knowledge and the role of working with children with SM. Despite the respective national professional bodies like ASHA or NASP advocating for their profession's responsibility to assess and treat children with SM, 21% of SLPs, speech and language pathologists, and 13% of school psychologists did not see treatment for SM as being within their scope of practice. Williams inferred that this incongruence indicated the need for proper training and continued education in SM for SLPs and speech and school psychologists. But the SM training received and training needs of therapists have not been investigated in the UK, which has led to this study. Our objective was to conduct a national online survey of SLTs and psychology therapists who work in the NHS, local authority, or health and social care services in the UK. The main aims of the study was to understand the training needs of the therapists, what SM-related training are therapists receiving, what are the training needs of professionals working with children with SM, and also what treatment as usual looks like for children with SM from a sample of NHS, local authority, and health and social care therapists. Which professions are providing intervention for children with SM in the last 5 years, and what multidisciplinary services are being provided for children with SM, and what kinds of interventions have therapists provided in the last 5 years. The survey was an online survey using Qualtrics, and to develop the survey, we used Wilson's and Dickinson's agile approach to survey development consisting of 4 phases. So the first phase is developmental exploratory phase. The second phase, alpha phase, where we focus on the building and testing the survey qualitatively. And then the beta phase is testing the survey quantitatively with a small group of therapists. And then the final phase is the live phase, where the survey is open for study participants to complete. The survey protocol was based on the Equator Network guidelines, so the checklist for reporting results in internet e-surveys, also known as the Cherries checklist, and the study protocol was updated and registered in the Open Science Framework in February 2024. The protocol includes how the survey was developed and shared and administered. And due to the inherent threat of online bots and fraudulent responses with online surveys, I developed a data integrity protocol to identify multiple entries from the same individual, potential fraudulent responses, online bots, and incomplete surveys. The protocol is to be applied by 2 coders in the research team prior to data analysis. And after the development, the final survey consisted of 32 items covering demographics, therapist awareness of SM, therapist training on SM, therapist approximate SM caseload, and SM interventions provided. In the study, we used non-probability purposive sampling of therapists who fulfilled the following criteria. providing some form of psychological therapy or speech and language therapy, worked with children between the ages of 3 and 12 years old, and worked for or provided a service for the National Health Service, local authority, or health and social care sector service in the UK. During recruitment, we used the snowball sampling methods by asking organizations and participants to share the survey with others in their networks who fulfilled the study criteria. And although this increases the risk of bias with the sampling method, it can be effective in reaching hidden and rare populations, particularly those who work with the children with SM. So recruitment file was shared with the relevant professional organizations such as Royal College, British Psychological Association, Association of Educational Psychologists, British Association for Music Therapy, and also art therapists and play therapists, and also other networks such as the SM SEN and NHS Therapists SM Support Group, and also SMIRA online forums as well. And we also posted on social media X. The survey was open for 16 weeks between November 2023 and February 2024. At the end of the 16 weeks, we had 244 responses. So the 2 coders applied the data integrity protocol, and there were 27 incomplete responses, 16 not fulfilling the inclusion criteria, and 11 completing less than 60% of the survey. And 16 responses were identified at risk. A total of 43 responses were removed, and the inter-rater reliability between the 2 coders was almost perfect, with a Cohen's kappa of 0.94. The final sample was 201 participants for the data analysis. SLTs, clinical psychologists, and educational psychologists were the main therapists who responded to the survey, and the other professionals group consisted of play therapists, music therapists, counseling psychologists, and community health nurses. Although there was a range of ages and experiences of the therapists in the sample, generally the average therapist was mature, averaging 38 years of age, with experience of roughly about 11 years. The therapists were spread across the UK nations broadly relative to the country's population, although Scotland and Northern Ireland were kind of higher in percentage. Regarding SM training received, out of the full sample, the whole dark blue circle, 59% of therapists had received some form of training in SM. The results of when the therapists accessed the training are presented in figure 2, showing 58% access training post-qualification, while only 15% received training during the professional qualification. And most of those that received training in both pre and post tended to be speech and language therapists. In an open text box, one therapist mentioned, "We did not cover selective mutism during my speech and language therapy training, as far as I can recall, which was a shock when I took my first SM child for therapy, and I had to try and read a large section of Maggie Johnson's book prior to seeing them." Interestingly, most of the samples, 85%, later indicated that they needed extra training in SM to do their job, and this was consistent across the professional groups. The most commonly reported training need was SM intervention and interventions of SM with co-occurring conditions, particularly occurring autism and also co-occurring language disorders and co-occurring speech sound disorders. One therapist mentioned in an open text box about training need, more awareness generally from people who are or have themselves been situationally mute, and so can inform compassionate and accurate practice going forwards. So I hope that the first talk is the start of this conversation and inclusion of people's lived experiences to inform our practice. 75% of the sample of therapists provided intervention for children with SM. Those providing intervention were most of the speech and language therapists and educational psychologists, all of the professionals in the other group, and just over half from the clinical psychologists. While 37 therapists reported using multidisciplinary approaches within the service, based on their description, 32 were judged to be multidisciplinary, i.e. more than 2 professionals involved. More frequently reported multidisciplinary teams consisted of core professionals who specialize in communication, psychology, and education, which makes sense. They tended to be a speech-language therapist, a teacher or education staff or educational psychologist, and a clinical psychologist or CAMS professional. There may be others from the medical professions or allied health professionals or mental health professionals in the multidisciplinary team as well. And one speech language therapist shared their desire to work more collaboratively with this clinical population. the speech therapist mentioned, it would be helpful to work more jointly with psychological services due to the anxiety factor of SM. Regarding people known to the child, most interventions will involve teaching staff and parents and carers, which echoes the systematic review, reinforcing how important they are in supporting the child, in particular in preschool and primary school children. Some interventions involve peers and also siblings and others, other members of the family and community, like grandparents or bus drivers or local shop owners. The mode is being the way and manner the intervention occurs. So the choices were face-to-face, in-person, online, or telephone. In-person only was 53%. The combination of in-person and online and telephone was 35%, and online only was 7%. The format is being the way the intervention is arranged. So the training, indirect therapy, like consulting, direct one-to-one, or group work. Indirect therapy is working with the parents and carers or the school staff to provide the support for the child. And this is quite common when working with children with SM. Direct therapy is when the therapist works directly with the child. And training is the psychoeducation or the training parents and the school staff to use the intervention. So due to the nature of SM, most of the therapy formats included indirect therapy, training, consulting with those who are important in the child's life, like parents, carers, and teaching staff. Most therapists use a combination of the training and indirect therapy, 32%, or training, indirect therapy, and direct therapy, 31%, and a smaller proportion, 22%, provided indirect therapy only. Most of the interventions were being carried out in the school, followed by in the clinics and in the home, and few occurred in the wider community. Again, reinforcing the need for the intervention to occur in situations where the mutism takes place, i.e. the school. But perhaps interventions can improve by utilizing more opportunities in the wider community. And just a reminder of the most common SM intervention components in the systematic review, it was exposure, reward, psychoeducation, rapport building, transfer of control, and coping strategies. In the spider diagram, the numbers of the center, numbers from the center moving out indicates the percentage the components was used by the therapist. So the further out the spider diagram indicates the more therapists were using that component. The purple line indicates the components used for 3 to 5 years. The orange line indicates the components used for 6 to 9 years. And the dark green line indicates the components used for 10 to 12 years. So exposure, psychoeducation, and rapport building and transfer of control strategies were important throughout the age ranges. Some form of play therapy component was important in early years 3 to 5, and then diminished as the child grew older, which makes sense. The intervention became more complex as the child grew older, with more prominent use of coping strategies, cognitive strategies, and problem solving from 6 to 9 years, and then more social skills from 10 to 12 years. Interestingly, few therapists used reward contingency management as part of their provision, contrary to the results in the systematic review. Now, I'm just going to show you a few charts here just to show the inconsistent distribution or of the sample or the variety within the sample. So there was a variation in the sample distribution of the length of the intervention session. So we're looking at dosage here. Likewise, there's a variation in the sample distribution of the number of intervention sessions. There's a huge range there. And then also there's great variation in the sample distribution of the intervention duration in the number of weeks of the intervention. So because of the variation in the distribution, we use the median, which is the middle value of the data set, instead of the mean, which is the average. We use the median to describe the sample dosage. So the median length of intervention sessions was 45 minutes in this sample, and the median number of sessions was 6 sessions, and the median duration of intervention was 12 weeks. This is the first first survey of UK therapists investigating their training needs and their therapy provision for children with selective mutism. Very few therapists are receiving SM training in the professional registration courses, and just over half are receiving SM training post-registration. Keane and colleagues in 2008 paper raised concerns regarding inadequate SM training in key professional groups in Europe, including the UK, and it appears little has changed in the last 17 years. Most therapists involving parents and school staff and are applying the intervention at school, which is in line with the findings in the systematic review. Exposure, psychoeducation, rapport building, transfer of control appear to be the core components across the ages, with added components and complexity as the age increases. Interestingly, few therapists are incorporating reward contingency management contrary to the evidence base. A wide variation found in delivery, so the mode and format, and also the dosage, raises questions about consistency and equitability in health services. And that's for those who are providing therapy, the NHS services who are providing therapy. The limitations, the sampling bias, so it's not representative of the clinical population of therapists, this sample is more likely to be proactive and have an interest in SM, responding to the call out to participate. And also the sample focus on NHS local authority and health and social care therapists, so it did not include therapists in independent practice. So we need to just be clear on what this sample represents or who it represents. Also, the SLT dominant sample, few clinical psychologists and educational psychologists we cannot generalize this to the whole clinical population. And the survey methodology relies on participant recall rather than objectively observed occurrences. So we just got to be mindful of the limitations of that. So very few therapists are receiving SM training in the professional registration courses, and many feel the need for training in SM to do their jobs. The interventions that therapists are providing, and when they do provide it in the NHS and local authority and health and social care settings, broadly reflect the evidence base. The wide variation in intervention, delivery, and dosage raises the need for cross-professional guidelines and quality standards to ensure consistency, accountability, and equitable delivery of evidence-based interventions for children with SM across the UK. This study adds to the current literature, reflecting on the needs for further training in SM and providing the description of the dynamic and nuanced complexity of the interventions available to children with SM. So thanks everyone for listening.
Thank you, Gino, for those two really interesting studies. And I've been keeping an eye on the chat as we've been going through this, and I can see, keeping an eye on the Q&A and see there's been a huge amount of engagement, including some really lovely comments about your research and appreciation for the sheer depth and breadth of the data that you've been gathering in this area. The questions are on a different screen here beside me, so just bear with me. They haven't appeared up on this screen just yet. I'm just going to give them another second to appear. So basically what I'm seeing is there are a couple of questions linked to similar topics. So maybe it would be good to tackle those ones in this session first. A couple of people have asked about the links between autism and selective mutism, and whether those in your sample, or whether you were aware of any in your sample who may have had an additional diagnosis of autism. And then the follow-on question was, did that impact the data collection in any way? So I wonder if you could speak to that theme.
Yes. So first of all, in terms of autism, autism can coexist with selective mutism, and there's studies out there that talk about that. Christensen in 2000, there was 7% in that study, comparison study, and there was another study, it was Steffenberg et al. In 2018, which it was roughly up to 63% of that clinical population had dual diagnosis of SM and autism as well. But we had to be kind of cautious with that percentage. That's quite high in the sense that it was a retrospective study looking back at clinical notes. But nevertheless, it does co-occur and it can be quite high in our clinical caseloads. In terms of my sample, yes, there was, I think there was one child that was diagnosed with autism, and there's kind of question marks with perhaps maybe two others. In terms of the adults with SM, yes, there was also one with the diagnosis of autism as well. So that also fed into the mix of the qualitative research. And also in terms of the parents reflected on their child, and some of them also had autism as well. So it was a mixture of those with just pure SM and also those with SM and autism.
And very much linked to that, Gino, there's a question here about the term situational mutism and the term selective mutism, and which of these you prefer, which people with selective mutism prefer.
Yes,
So the
so I
person
mean,
is
I
saying
would
they're
probably
using
prefer,
both.
yes, I would prefer personally situational mutism, but I think for the sake of clarity and communication, working in the clinical world, but also working in the academic world, we need to have terms where people understand and can communicate. So until I would ideally like the name to be changed to situational mutism and in the next DSM and next ICD 12 perhaps, but so that we can use the same terminology. It's probably situational mutism is probably more accurate, but I think for the sake of communicating with other academics, other clinicians, then because in the US they don't use the term situational mutism. I know situational mutism has really pushed forward through social media, but talking to other speech language pathologists in the US, they're not using that term very often. So for the sake of just communicating the definitions and that we're not misunderstanding each other, I use selective mutism from a professional perspective, but personally, I prefer situational mutism, and I think it's more accurate, and hopefully it can change. And from what I also understand, I think Alison Slukin, Maggie and Alison Wingens have been pushing for it for many decades now.
Okay. There's a question here, or there are a number of people actually also asking about neuro-affirming approaches when working in the area of selective mutism. So how can we ensure that we're using a neuro-affirming approach, knowing that many of our children have various neurodivergences?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I think that probably also taps into maybe why we're using less reward and contingency management strategies. That's my theory anyway. Some information that came through in the qualitative research shared how the rewards can often be associated with ABA and what came through in terms of how do we go forward with that, or often the therapist that shared would talk about focusing on intrinsic motivations. So I think we're pretty safe if we're focused on the child's motivation, what they would like to achieve, and then move with that rather than our own, enforcing what we think the child should be achieving, start with what they want to achieve and move on from there. And I think also the idea with using those words safe or safe enough can help, I think should help in terms of being safe for those neuroaffirming clients, just because it's then from the perspective of the child rather than what we think as therapists. It then changes the lens and the angle of that. So I think by using that terminology, it ensures that we can use that practice with others. When it comes to, say, for instance, with autism and so CBT, so some of the research that's come out with that, when it comes to the Professor Kathy Cresswell in the parent-led CBT program that's been adapted for those with autism, they, instead of using a reward, they talk about celebration and rather than a reward, because of the connotations linked with ABA, and just focusing more on celebrating that success or celebrating the thing that they want to achieve. So it's just, yeah, slightly changing the terminology to make sure that it's neuroaffirming and it applies to all of it. And actually, neuroaffirming terminology is often safe for everyone anyway.
And that really speaks to the nature of the questions that came in, actually, because they were concerns about CBT or very behaviorist approaches and how they might lead to more masking in the kids we work with. So that's great. There's another question here from Where is it gone? Sorry, the screen just jumps every time new questions come in. Yes, there's a question from Alison asking, what tools would you use to assess how safe or unsafe a person feels in their environment?
So I use a comfort scale, but it's a bit broader. It's like a scale of 1 to 10 rather than 0 to 4. And actually, this was advised by names escapes me. I want to acknowledge who I got it from. It's
Is it Kuiper's? Is it the 5-point scale?
no,
Or
actually the comfort scale that I had for the research, it was based on the 5-point scale, but the 10-point scale, it was using the 3 zones of thinking about comfort, stretch, and then stress zone. And so when I use that with clients, so I'm working with secondary students at the moment, I use that as a way just to gauge how they're feeling about an activity. So we're trying to negotiate what the next activity is going to be. And then they will let me know where they're at. And we talk about how if it's in the comfort zone, that's good. But if it's in the stretch zone, it's also good to help them realize that actually sometimes just being just outside of our comfort zone is a good thing. It helps us stretch and grow. But we don't want it to be in the stress zone. So if they're, the comfort zone is, say, for example, 1 to say 5 is comfort, and then so 1 to 4 is comfort, 5, 6, 7 is stretch, and then 8, 9, 10 is stress zone, then as long as they point into the stretch zone, then we go with that, and they kind of know that that's what that's kind of moving in that sweet spot of growing. Whereas if they put in the stress zone, we know for sure, okay, we need to break down the step even further. So that way we ensure that's not going to be overwhelming for the child, and that we're more likely to have success in those activities too.
And I think we've just got time for one final one. This one asks, would you agree that it's important that SLTs support additional needs, for example, DLD or intellectual disability, which may be underlying maintaining factors? So these may be factors underlying the SM, and the person is really keen to know, should we be involved directly in working with those areas as well? It's Abigail.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. As long as whatever activity you're doing is within the stretch zone of that child. So say, for instance, and I think as speech therapists, we'll be pretty good at knowing how to gauge what type of activity the child can do. But yes, absolutely. Any underlying coexisting condition needs to be part of that assessment and understanding that the child's profile, and then we need to put any kind of supports within that. And you're right, it will reinforce the mutism because it's that negative experience of communication that's constantly being reinforced. So having a clearer picture of the child's communication profile will be really helpful, and supporting them and scaffolding throughout.
So we're going to wrap it up there with the questions. Thank you so much, Gino, for these really important studies. I think make a huge contribution to our understanding of, first of all, what people with selective mutism feel about their condition and what they want from therapy, and also understanding what the current provision looks like in terms of training and actually the nature of what happens on the ground. So this makes an important contribution to our understanding of these areas. Huge thanks to everyone who's engaged fantastically throughout this talk. And there's loads more questions in there, Gino. So there's lots more to go through, and lots of nice comments and feedback as well. Remember to fill out your feedback at the end. That's really useful for presenters and organisers. And also head over to the Challenge Hub, I believe it's called, and use your code to gain extra points over there. I hope you all enjoy the rest of the conference, and thanks again for your engagement today.
Thanks, Nita. Thanks for everyone for their time.